Well, here's a name that'll never sell. Robert Kennedy Jr. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for having us this morning.
Right? Didn't you work for Sonny Callahan?
You know, it's the most wonderful thing. I was fortunate enough to attend the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, and we actually met Sonny Callahan when we were a senior in high school, and we were going through the application process. So one of the absolutely wonderful things was he allowed me to volunteer in his office, and I actually used to do that during the summers when I came home for summer break.
So you got bitten by the bug.
I got bitten by the bug, and then I got cured by the bug and have been rebitten by the bug again.
Yeah, that happens, you know. It just does. So, again, the name is, so on the ballot, you kind of have a little advantage because people go, I think I know that name. Yeah. Does that help or does it hurt?
Well, it's both a blessing and a curse. So the first thing people typically do is they see the name Robert Kennedy Jr. and they think there may be some association with the Massachusetts family. And people may love that family or they may hate that family. But from my perspective, the one thing is it at least gets people interested enough to listen.
And say, well, I don't know. This guy might be interesting. Yeah. So there are 7 of you because we had another drop out.
Oh, did you? Okay.
So there's 7 Democrats. There are 9 Republicans, right? Have I got that right? Because we're down to how do you stand out? Because this is the tough part. Only 2 are going to go forward from August 15th. How do you stand out? What are you hearing out there?
So in order to stand out, I just present myself as a different kind of candidate. And as I go through and I meet people around the state and I start to present that case, it starts to resonate with folks. And that's the way that you stand out.
You are, over in the House, they called them blue dogs. I don't know what they would call them in the Senate. But you're a Second Amendment guy.
I am.
You have some other conservative views.
I do.
Is that possible within your party?
It absolutely is. You know, it was interesting. We have been fortunate and blessed to have the opportunity to have some professional political folks who are associated with our organization. And as we were going through the interviews, deciding who it was we were going to invite to be part of the team, the conventional wisdom that a lot of folks mentioned was that in order to get through a Democratic primary, you have to go to the left. And the thing that I mentioned was I'm starting day 1 of my campaign running from the center. And the reason why I'm running from the center is because I'm telling you exactly who I am and what I believe. And I believe that one of the issues that we've had historically with our country is that folks have moved so far to the polls that we haven't been able to come to the middle and actually get stuff done.
Well, that's the problem in Washington now, right? We have an establishment. I really believe both parties are in trouble. Mm-hmm. I believe both of them are. There's a lot of focus on the Republican Party losing itself. The Democrats are in trouble, too. I call it the Adorable Care Act. I want to get into this a little bit because it just keeps giving, right? I think this thing needs to be scrapped. You disagree with this, but
I do.
But I wonder who's helped when you have an insurance policy that's maybe cheap and maybe subsidized,
right?
But then you have a deductible you can't meet,
right?
And it's nice to have a card, but if you can't use it, what's the point?
So I'm actually going to turn this just a little bit, and I'm going to tell you what I talked about last night, and I've talked about every time I've had an opportunity on the trail, and that's my wife. So my wife is a person who's done everything right. She graduated from Spelman College. She got her MBA from Duke University. I actually saw her the very first day that I was in class, the woman who would become my future wife. She worked for Procter & Gamble on the CoverGirl brand, and then she fulfilled her lifelong dream of returning to Atlanta and opening her own business. She actually ran her own brand agency.
Wow.
And while running her business...
Boy, did you marry above your pay grade, huh?
I definitely did.
Well, a lot of us have done that.
I know she's listening right now. Aquilyn, I love you, baby. So while she was doing that, she got dropped by her insurance. She got dropped for a combination of pre-existing conditions and lifetime limits. My wife is a 3-time survivor. 2 heart attacks, 1 stroke.
Wow.
Ooh. So the question that I ask, and we had a event last night at the West Blount Chamber of Commerce, and our Republican colleagues were there, and I asked, what does my wife do?
Well, and I want to get to that part, because somewhere in there's got to be something other than in the UK when they want to fix the statistics. They just leave you in the ambulance to die so the hospital doesn't have to take you. This whole thing is a mess. Anyway, more with Robert Kennedy Jr. coming up. We've invited all. Not all have accepted, but we're certainly getting to know a lot of people who would like to serve as your U.S. Senator. And we've got, sadly, in both camps, we have people that in a normal election cycle might have a really good chance of serving, but we just have so many. Anyway, Robert Kennedy Jr. is one of the Democrats. There's 7 of those. I want to get back to, all right, so what I like to call the Adorable Care Act. I just love that name. It still has the same initials. It's just different. All right. So your wife is a 3-time survivor, 2 heart attacks, a stroke, you said.
I did.
So what does she do? I think if we don't get back to some market principles, and we don't have because big government just hasn't done it well. How do we get from here to where we want to be and take care of people like your wife? And, there is something to be said for pre-existing, because I can't call my insurance agent and say, hey, remember that insurance I had on my house that I canceled last week? My house is on fire. Can I get a policy? I mean, there has to be some reasonable pre-existing conditions, right?
I don't think that's necessarily right.
But the then people are going to go out of business.
Well, let's
right now we're just giving the insurance companies free money the way it's working now.
Well, let's take a step back and answer your question in 2 parts.
Okay.
So I mentioned that my wife and I both are graduates of Duke University, the Fuqua School of Business, where both of us have earned our MBAs. And when I position myself as a fiscally responsible Democrat. What does that mean? The fiscal
hopefully it's less government.
Well, the fiscally conservative Republican would say the program shouldn't exist, or the program should be managed at the state level or by private industry. Whereas the progressive Democrat would say the program should exist at all cost and continue to throw money at it. What I say as a fiscally responsible Democrat is that any program you have should have a goal, it should have an evaluation time frame, and it should have a success criteria.
So all right, so give us a little, without getting too much in the weeds here, how do we get there?
So
what would you do?
So
wave your magic wand, you get to make the decision.
Well, we have to do the work.
Yeah.
And that's the
important. Nobody wants to do the work. That's part, in either side.
Right. So we have to start there. So if for a market to be stable, the money going into the market has to equal the money coming out of the market. Can we agree on that?
Sure.
2 things have to balance. Can we also agree that we don't need to put more money in the market? No one's saying that healthcare is too cheap.
No.
No one said they want to write a bigger check for healthcare.
No.
Okay. So now we go to the cost side of the equation. Now, I mentioned that we come out of a Fortune 500 MBA business perspective. And what we do when we're looking at this in terms of the way we go to work every day is we look at the cost, and then we analyze that cost line item by line item. I believe one of the large problems that we have right now is nobody actually understands what anything costs. Do you really know what an MRI costs?
And and therein lies my sister, my sister who works. She's a dock worker.
Okay.
On the Georgia coast, and I finally got her to think about. She said, "Well, I have a right to this health care, and I don't care how much it costs." I said, "Okay." You used to work in the convenience. She managed a convenience store in her previous life. And I said, imagine one of your customers drives up and fills their gas tank. And then they wave at you and they drive off. She said, well, I'd call the police. I said, no. Somebody else is paying the tab for that. They don't care how much that gallon of gas, how much it costs per gallon, because they're just filling their tank. Somebody else is picking up the cost. I said, that's what we have with the healthcare situation right now. Nobody cares because nobody has any skin in the game.
Well, I was actually talking to Walter on the phone yesterday. Walter, we were in Chick-fil-A. Was it yesterday afternoon? Yeah, we were in Chick-fil-A yesterday afternoon. Walter is a gentleman that I met, and when I told him I was a Democrat, he literally groaned. He was like, oh, Democrat. Yeah. And so we started.
Well, because we have preconceived notions, right?
Absolutely.
Kind of where we are.
But as he and I started to talk, and I started to explain just with regards to healthcare, what it was that my perspective was, in the context of the conversation you and I are having now, we're really talking about doing the work. And transparency in pricing is one of the elements of doing the work. And as you have more transparency and you can understand what things actually cost, then you can systematically determine whether or not you need that individual line item.
Well, and we're going to have to make, and this is the harsh reality, right? Mm-hmm. We have gone, and I talked to hospital administrators. One of the David Spillers. I don't know if you've met him. He is he's the CEO of Hunt's HH Health System, which is Huntsville Hospital, okay. And they operate a number of hospitals in the area. He also happens to be the chairman right now of the State Hospital Association, so he's well involved in how all this goes. And one of the conversations he and I continue to have is the fact that we go to any measure to save lives now, mm-hmm. no matter what it costs.
Right.
We're going to keep you alive and what happens when granddad's in the hospital, right? And granddad's fading and mm-hmm. well, doctor, you got to do anything to keep him alive. Right. We have reached that point in our life where I'm not saying because death panels is a horrible thing and they're doing that silly thing in Britain with a little kid with a baby, mm-hmm. but we're going to have to decide if we want to pay for those extreme measures, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by we have to decide, right? So
or somebody has to decide if we're going to pay the money for it, right?
So let's think about it this way. We're talking about the cost of an overall program. Right. That was the nature of what your initial question mm-hmm. was, right? And so from a non-inflammatory marketing perspective, we talked about analyzing the cost and doing that line item by line item. That's all the work that we have to do prior to getting to the one specific situation of saying, are you going to spend a little money or a lot of money to keep grandfather alive?
Yeah, and that is what I want to be fair. I want to give you more mm-hmm. of a chance coming up. Back with Robert Kennedy Jr. He is a Democrat, one of 7 seeking that U.S. Senate seat. Currently held, I guess, if you want to call it that, by Luther Strange. It's an appointment. Occupied would be a good, if you want to put it that way. I want to move on to some other stuff, but I want to finish this thing on the the Adorable Care Act, as I like to call it. Kind of where we go from here, and we sort of, you and I kind of shared an interesting story during the break. We get this thing from our insurance company that says, this is what it costs, this is what the hospital accepted, and this is what you owe.
Yes.
And I look at that and I go, huh? Because if that's what they accepted, then that must be what it cost, right? Or did it?
Well, that's the question. We don't know. And so when we're analyzing costs from a business perspective, what we say externally to the customer is a little bit different than what we say internally within our organizations. We need to have somebody in some sort of oversight function who understands exactly what it costs and can communicate that to the public in a way that makes sense. And then that will allow us as the public to decide where it is that we want to spend those dollars.
You know, and in fairness to the hospitals, and they say, oh, they charged me that for an aspirin. They didn't really charge you for the pill. They charged you for the delivery. Because somebody had to prescribe it and somebody had to bring it up and dispense it, right?
It's a fully loaded cost that actually gets passed on to the customer. But as you're able to start to analyze that and understand what's underneath the covers, so to speak, those costs come down over time.
All right. Without spending too much time, because I want to get to some other stuff, bullet points on where we need to go and what we need to concentrate on other than, all right, so we got to identify cost. Mm-hmm. Where do we go from there? And again, I first of all, is healthcare a right or is it a privilege?
In the world that exists right now, healthcare is a for-profit market, so it's something that has to be paid for. It's not a constitutional right in the way that we would talk about the right to freedom of expression.
So we've got, and again, we're going to have to be willing to pay, just like we pay to eat and have a house, we're going to have to be willing to pay for our healthcare, right? To everybody.
Well, the money in the market has to pay for the healthcare, and it's either coming from premiums, deductibles, co-pays, or government funding.
All right, how do we get the patient and the doctor back together without all these other people in the middle? How do we get there?
Well, the first thing that we have to do is we have to get beyond the marketing slogans and the sound bites and actually focus on where we are today, which is the Affordable Care Act is law. We need to get away from the sound bites of repeal and replace because that's actually a non-starter. But the Affordable Care Act, as you and I agree, is far from perfect.
Yeah, it's collapsing.
It's not collapsing.
It certainly looks like it is.
There are counties that have had either a single provider or no provider at all. Mm-hmm. We know that more people actually got insured, but with premiums, deductibles, and copays in the state of Alabama, that they went up.
Yeah.
While deductibles, premiums, and copays in places like New York and Chicago and Washington, D.C. went down. My priority right now is Alabama families. So I believe in order to go forward, we need to start where we are today, fix the problems that we have, and not try to throw it out and start from scratch.
Medicaid out of control? Is Medicaid out of control?
You can't answer that question in isolation. The two of the things go together.
But we expanded it to people beyond those in need.
But Alabama did not accept all of the Medicaid expansion.
Right,
and
but we still had people trying to sign up for it. I mean, it's still costing us more than it was before.
But what you and I are talking about right now, in a very rational way, illustrates the nature of the challenge. And that's why we actually have to roll up our sleeves and do the work. I can't distill it down to a single statement the way that you want me to.
Yeah.
Because the two have to go together.
Yeah, and we would have to have a conference or something.
Exactly.
But the work has to be put in.
The work,
something that's sadly is a bit complicated to unravel.
And the work has to be done on both sides of the aisle.
I want to jump to education.
Yes.
You're a big proponent of public education.
Absolutely.
How much as a U.S. Senator would you want to be involved in education?
So education primarily is a state issue. It is. But the one thing that I think is very important for us at the federal level is to be advocating for the things that we think are important. I'm a product of the Mobile County Public School System in Mobile, Alabama, and I'm a proud graduate of John S. Shell High School. If it wasn't for public education, I wouldn't have had the foundation that I developed in order to get to the Naval Academy. So it is a focus area, but it's primarily a state-run function.
But, and we need to get a little more creative. You know, I remember girls-only schools and boys-only schools, okay. And those make sense in some environments because some kids are better focused that way.
Okay.
I think private schools have a role. I think homeschool is we've got to find a way to do it all. And you ask any principal, and I've asked a number of them, if there's already competition out there, even between public schools, competition's out there already.
Yes.
They know there's competition. Some of them embrace it and some of them don't. And again, so your view is the federal government can provide the guidance, but at least let the state do its thing.
Yeah, for the most part, it is a state function. The role of the federal government is primarily to ensure fairness. You know, one of the things that we talk a lot about here is the history and where we are kind of as generational legacies. And we wouldn't be at this point had not the federal government stepped in and said that you had to do some things from an equality standpoint with regards to how resources are distributed. So I still think the federal government has a role, but as you mentioned before, I don't have issues with private schools or charter schools, but I do believe that public schools need to be funded, and they need to be funded as well as they possibly can be.
With some accountability. I think.
Absolutely.
This one of the things you talk about is right to vote, and one of the things in your party is voter suppression tactics and all that. Do you consider voter ID a voter suppression thing?
So this is similar to you asking me the question about Medicaid.
Yeah.
So do I have a problem personally with a voter ID? Well, of course not. I have my driver's license, I have my concealed carry permit, I have my passport. But look at the reason why voter ID came in as a law. We have historical voter suppression tactics, and when they did the investigation on the prior governor, it was said that when they closed those driver's license stations throughout the state, they were primarily in rural locations, highly African-American populations, and the objective was to make it harder for a person to get a voter ID so that they wouldn't be able to vote.
Yeah, that was pretty stupid on his part. And everybody wants to have their picture taken with him because he thinks it's because he's popular. No, he looks like Mr. Burns.
Right. So, but I do want to.
But that was really dumb on his part. I think that was stupid.
And it was. But this actually illustrates the point. When we talk about voters, and you say there's one thing in and of itself, is that one thing a problem? Yes or no? That ends up creating a problem if you don't look at the entire context or the motivation behind why. But
on the other side of the coin, I'll have people sit and say there's no voter fraud. There are cases of voter fraud that have been proven, and nobody wants to look at them.
Absolutely, but how many cases of voter fraud have come to court and been prosecuted where that voter fraud would have actually changed the outcome of the election?
Well, the one down in Utah was pretty close. Most of those public officials went to prison.
But this illustrates what I'm talking about right now.
Yeah.
We absolutely want to ensure that the person voting is a person voting.
Yeah.
The whole concept of voter ID didn't even come up the first time until the early 70s.
Yeah.
So we know there are other ways.
But I think we got to get past that. We've got to, because people are going to try to cheat. And the best way to do that is make sure people know that that's who you are, right?
If you can ensure that a person can verify who they are to get an ID, you should be able to do that the same day of the election.
I agree with that. I agree. If you can identify who you are, we're fine. Robert Kennedy Jr. is, so you grew up in Mobile.
Yes, sir.
From Pritchard, which is, I guess, is that the north? That used to, I guess that's still the north suburb, right?
So it sits right next to Mobile. It literally shares the line with Mobile. It's right there.
I always thought it was north, but that may be another one. All right, so you lead with your faith.
I do.
In a party that doesn't seem to value faith. How do you reconcile that one?
Well, I always think that's an assumption, right? And so we grew up in church. I grew up in church, Greater Morning Star Baptist Church right there in Mobile. And a lot of the folks that I associate in my community are Democrats as well. I think there's a public perception that folks in the Democratic Party do not lead with faith, but I don't think that perception is necessarily reality.
Well, I mean, I believe this is one of the things I found was interesting, and it's starting to get a little attention. When you go into the black community, you find that those people may be physically a little more liberal in their views, but on social things, they're very conservative.
Okay.
That, I think, was overlooked in fact, the party overlooked that. And people like Ben Carson brought that to the attention of the Republican Party. Look at all these people you're not embracing and talking to. You could bring them over.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting that you mention that because the African-American church is what fueled the evolution in the civil rights movement that actually brought us to the point of having the last conversation about voter rights.
Yeah. So look, we got to get confidence back in the system, and I preach this all the time. I talk about big government, big government from the right or big government from the left. Guess what? It's still big government.
Okay.
And it's a big bureaucracy. And, we're going to have to start breaking things, which is what I think the whole Trump thing was about, whether people voted for Trump because it was Trump or just some guy who's going to go in there and break things. But we got to break the mold because I don't think the founding fathers had this in mind. I don't think the founding fathers had cell phones and airplanes in mind either. Or 50 incubators, but that's pretty cool. Or congressional pensions. I'll throw that one in too. More with Robert Kennedy Jr. We'll let him do a little politicking too coming up. Robert Kennedy Jr. is a Democrat. He's one of 7 seeking the nomination on August 15th. 2 will emerge. I want to get to, I think one of the things, and I hope more people like you get involved in your party because I think your party's in trouble. And I think the Republican Party's in trouble, too. I think the progressive movement has destroyed the Democratic Party. I think it has. I think because it's just it's like we're heading to Venezuela if we're not careful. Why do you think you can emerge out of this 7? Well, it really comes down to 3 reasons: faith, family, and freedom. I'm a fiscally responsible Democrat who leads with faith. I'm a husband who works in the private sector in order to take care of my family. And I'm a graduate of the United States Naval Academy and a formal naval officer who served in uniform for over 9.5 years to protect our freedoms, including freedoms like the Second Amendment. I'm a different kind of candidate. And because I'm a different kind of candidate and my financial war chest started at 0, nobody has to worry about whether or not I got bought or any money that I got in any quid pro quos. I'll ask this of anybody, whoever their leadership is. Are you prepared to challenge Chuck Schumer and the Democrat leadership as much as I would challenge Republicans to challenge Mitch McConnell? I'm actually already doing it. And there are some things that I have actually put on the table that are things I think that we as a Democratic Party need to do differently. And I love being a Democrat. And so when I lead by example. And when there is accountability, I hold people to account. And I've already started doing that, and I've done that publicly. Is this because I've talked to a number of you, when I say you, in the mindset that you're in, where I put Joe Manchin maybe in West Virginia kind of in that category as one, and there are a few others. But then you have the people that are just wacky, way off in the left field somewhere. And I go, the Founding Fathers wouldn't have gone for that. Somewhere, both of these parties have got to get back on track, and they're not right now. Neither one. And I think most of it is people who have been there too long, and they live in this bubble, and they don't see how the rest of us live. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm not sure that it's fair to say, but the reference that you made on the Democratic side, Joe Manchin, I actually think is a very good one. There's also one I want to make on the Republican side, and that's John McCain. He was recently diagnosed with brain cancer, and he is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy class of 58. And we actually want him to know that we are keeping him in our thoughts and prayers. That comes from Robert Kennedy and Scott Hottenstein, Naval Academy class of 92. And the reason why I mentioned Senator McCain from an accountability standpoint was there was a point in the presidential election when he was challenged, and somebody in open session said that at the time Senator Obama was a Muslim. There's nothing wrong with it if he were, but Senator McCain corrected that young lady and corrected her on the spot, saying that was inappropriate. Yeah. We need more people like that, and I come out of that tradition. So to answer your question, whenever we see anything that's not happening correctly, we will hold individuals to account.
You know, we're not having fistfights on the floor of the Senate anymore like we did in the 1800s. It's a little more civil. I don't know how much. It's tradition here to give you the last minute and a half or so to do some politicking. Why Robert Kennedy Jr. on April? Good Lord. August 15th.
Yes, the reason why Robert Kennedy Jr. on August 15th are the three things that we keep coming back to: faith, family, and freedom. We believe that if we govern based upon our values and stop being distracted by code words and dog whistles, that we'll be able to unify across lines. These are the artificial lines that people typically use in order to divide us. We can actually roll up our sleeves and do the work. And so I'm the type of candidate that can actually win the general election because I'm willing to cross those lines.
All right, real quickly, how do people find your campaign?
You can find us at www.teamkennedy2017.org or on our Facebook page at Bobby K for Senate.
All right. Robert Kennedy Jr., one of 7 Democrats. Great getting to know you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much for having us.